Now we're going to solder the pieces together. I use a Weller 100, and you need to use a 60-40 solder. That's what's made for stained glass, and that's what melts at the appropriate temperature that the soldering irons are heated to. So you use flux. I'm currently using a gel flux. You can buy it in liquid form. I'm not crazy about that. Or you can buy it in paste form. That's fine as well. And then you solder all the joints, and or depending on if you're going to solder the whole thing at once or just the joints at first so that you can take the pins out. And it won't melt appropriately or smoothly if you don't have flux on it. So again, you can hold your solder above the soldering iron or below the soldering iron, or whatever works best for you. But you want that rounded, smooth edge. You don't want it flat, because then it'll show the contours of the copper foil. One reason I like to tack the corners first is because then I can take these pins out and they won't get in the way of my hand as I'm trying to solder. I've soldered the front side where the joints meet, or each individual piece meets the other one. Then I'll solder the back side. I'll flux it. You can tell if you forgot to put flux someplace because the solder will be lumpy and bumpy. I also always have a dampened sponge close by. You flick off the excess solder and wipe off the excess solder, trying to keep your soldering iron clean as you're working. Now that I have all of this soldered, obviously I don't have the head done yet, but I'll come back and do that later. You can see that there's little pieces of solder laying here and there on the project. It'll just wipe off normally. There might be exceptions to that, but normally you can just scrape it off. And then obviously I still have on my numbers, so now it's time to clean it up. One thing to note is feel the glass as you're soldering. If it's really hot, go solder someplace else in the project, because if you linger too long in one spot and the glass gets super hot, then it could crack the glass. I think it's probably around 5 seconds. You know, if you were just to stay in here in this one spot for maybe 5 seconds, that would be too long, but you can tell by touching the glass. The way you clean off flux is with Dawn dishwashing soap. So I'm just going to spritz it. Then start washing off all that greasy stuff. Dawn is so good at cleaning off grease. I've been told that some people then, in addition to using Dawn, they also use baking soda, and because it neutralizes the acid in the flux. And so that's a good idea too. You can also, the same company that makes well, there's probably more than one, but the same company that makes this flux also makes a cleaner that cleans off the flux. And if you don't get it real clean, down the road, it can, after you patina it, it can get a white substance on it. It kind of looks like mold. I don't know what it really is, but that's why you want to get all the flux off. I'm going to take this to the sink and finish rinsing off the Dawn, and I'll be right back. The next step is to put on a patina, depending on if you want it some other color than silver. Here's black patina, and it comes in copper. Those are the two most commonly sold at stained glass stores. I have found some other choices in other places. Be aware that black patina comes for solder and lead, or it also comes for zinc, and they're not interchangeable. So you'll want to get the one that's for solder. So you can either use a paintbrush, similar, well, just like this one that I used my flux, although you don't want to use the one you used for your flux, or you can use a cotton ball. You don't want to contaminate the liquid that's in here, so once you've put your cotton ball in the lid, you don't want to go back again. Now you can see how it's making all the solder lines black. I'm going to turn this over, use the back side that's not contaminated to get more patina on it. When the patina dries, it dries in a matte color, so you'll want to go over it with wax. And you could probably buy wax that's meant for cars. They make a wax for stained glass, but I think wax for cars would probably work the same. I'm going to wipe up any excess patina that's on the glass. When I use the cotton ball, there's really not much patina on the glass. When I use a paintbrush, there is. And although the cotton ball absorbs more patina, so therefore it uses your patina faster, but it makes less of a mess on the glass. Now, we'll put wax on it. And then we let the wax dry, and this will keep your solder lines shiny, which makes them pretty. When they get matte, they're not so pretty. You have to let this dry to, if you've ever waxed a car, till the wax gets milky looking, and that means it's dry. And then once it gets to that milky stage, then you just take a clean cloth and polish it like you would a car. Now my wax is basically dry, so let me zoom in and see if you can tell at all. See how it's that creamy white shade? You know it's dry then, and you can just polish it off. As I probably told you earlier, the reason I'm not messing with the head is because I haven't put the rest of the head together. I'm going to come back and do that at a later time. Something else I should tell you is whether you've done a copper foil project or even a lead project, you need to clean it with ammonia-free glass cleaner. If you use Windex or vinegar, it's going to take that patina off and it'll go back to silver again. So make sure you only clean it with ammonia-free glass cleaner. In the final video, I was soldering. So for soldering, you needed a Weller 100, or at least that's the soldering iron I used. They do sell soldering irons with that don't have the controls in the soldering iron. You have to buy a rheostat. I prefer just to buy a soldering iron that has the heat control element in the soldering iron. I used a 60-40 solder. I used a sponge to clean off my iron as I went. Let's see, I used a brush for flux. Here's my flux. And then I cleaned it off with dish soap, Dawn dish soap. And then I used patina. I used a black patina for solder. I waxed it with I happen to use a wax made for stained glass, but you could probably find some other wax. I painted on his eyes. Got a little cheap paintbrush, and it needed turpentine for cleaning off the paint off the paintbrush. It's such a cheap paintbrush, you probably don't have to. I used these two pliers for cutting and manipulating my 14 gauge copper wire. And I guess that's it. Oh no, I applied the patina with cotton balls.